So, John, I don't know about you, but for me, it's been a very satisfying Triple Crown so far. Very satisfying results for the first two races to see Kenny McPeek and now Dwayne Lucas win the first two legs of the Triple Crown. Seize the Grey goes wire to wire in the Preakness on Saturday over a sloppy track. Lots to break down from this phenomenal story and race. First off, it's awesome to see Dwayne still killing it at 88 years old. He's, the trainer emeritus in racing. I mean, I guess it's not emeritus because emeritus is retired, but you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. He's the big cheese who doesn't necessarily win big races as often as he used to, but he can still get a good horse to a race and to produce a top effort. And we talked about it last week that, the assumption was that Imagination was going to clear from the outside post. And I was like, I don't know, these two Dwayne Lucas horses, you got to think he's going to want speed from at least one of them. And shout out to Jaime Torres, who popped out to the front. And Frankie Dettori, I love Frankie, but I don't know what exactly he was doing on Imagination, yanking him back, taking him way out into the track. Clearly was not comfortable. Now, he probably was not going to do any running anyway, but I just felt like that they were both, it was one of those races they were both kind of looking at each other like, you go, no, you go, no, you go, you go. And eventually Jaime Torres went to the front and Seize the Grey 2 weeks after winning the Pat Day Mile at Churchill Downs, comes back and wins the Preakness for MyRacehorse, son of Arrogate. There's so many angles here to tackle. But, John, why don't you give me your first blush reaction to the Preakness?
Well, this is a feel-good story, and it's a feel-good story for a lot of reasons that we'll get into, Joe. But most of all, let's take a step back. And again, I hate that we have to have this counter and we have to have the statistic, but apparently every single horse that ran on Black-Eyed Susan and Preakness Day came home fine. Now, Just Steel, who is also a horse that is managed by the coach or trained by the coach, came back and was injured after running in the Preakness, but was able to come back on his own power and strength. And again, it's a shame that we have to have that out there, but it's great that there wasn't a major issue on the racetrack. And the racetrack was a little goofy that day, that weekend, I should say. It was sloppy, it was muddy, it was sealed, it was unsealed. I mean, there were a lot of things that were going on that could have made it, nail biting watching the race.
And soft turf too, really soft turf as well.
Really soft turf. Very good point. Yep. So I understand the that you have to have these races run on the surfaces that they're offered because they are such highly prestigious races. That being said, I was pleased that when all was said and done, the census was 100%. Everyone that went out came home. And again, hopefully that is a statistic that we don't talk about as much because it's just common. And it's just, that's the normal way of doing business. I was really pleased to see that 3 horses, and Joe, you brought this up actually, so I'm going to give you full credit. 3 horses that ran on Derby Day finished first, second, and third in the Preakness. Thus, at least for a very short sample, debunking the idea of horses can't come back on 2 weeks rest when there's other horses that are waiting in the wings to try to beat them and they're fresh. Seize the Grey ran on Derby Day, albeit in the Pat Day Mile, but won the Pat Day Mile. Mystic Dan obviously came back after a nail-biting win in the Kentucky Derby to finish second. And Catching Freedom came off the pace, and we talked about it last week. I really liked Catching Freedom, and you brought up an excellent point that I didn't think of, and that is there's no pace in here for him to come back at. And sure enough, that's actually what happened for the other horses in the race, other than Seize the Grey. Let's also talk a little bit about the fact that, Dettori, I wasn't sure what he was doing on Imagination. I've heard various thoughts on it, whether, like you said, it was, you take the lead. No, I'll take the lead. No, you take the lead. And just waiting for somebody to kind of go to, all the way to my thought was that it was Dettori giving kind of a military salute of letting that berth be there for Muth, who should have been there in the race. And for going into the first turn, that's what they were doing. They were giving him a salute, like, this is where you would have been, buddy. I'm sorry that you couldn't be here. It was like an homage to his absent stablemate.
You're saying he was letting the ghost of Muth
the ghost
take the lead.
Exactly. Yep. To let him have the middle rail. And I was wondering, watching the race, if maybe that was the better part of the racetrack, because again, they had just unsealed it the race prior. So maybe they were trying to get an idea of like, hey, you don't want to be on the rail because it's too sticky down there, or too deep down there. You want to be in the middle of the racetrack. But apparently that wasn't it either. And again, it was Imagination's only race where he was off the board. So the horse is a good horse. It's just a question of, that day he wasn't himself, and it was the first time running in slop, first time running in front of that kind of a crowd. There's a myriad of reasons why maybe the horse didn't run that well, but it just wasn't his day, unfortunately. But it was Seize the Grey's day, which means it was like 2,600 people's day also.
Yeah. No, I mean, we're going to get into the MyRacehorse discussion, but this was clearly their biggest win yet for a horse that they own the entirety of. They obviously were a part of Authentic as well, but didn't own nearly as much. So there's a lot to be discussed, and we will discuss it about the MyRacehorse business model, whether it's good for racing or bad for racing, and everything in between. But I want to talk about Arrogate because anybody who knows me knows he's one of my favorite horses that I've ever seen, probably top 3 for me all time. He got off to a bit of a slow start as a stallion. I say that like kind of tongue in cheek because if you don't bust out of the gate with $1 million sales purchases and 7 winners in your first month and a half, everyone's like, oh, what a bust. But he came on towards the end of his first crop racing, and you look at the 3 crops that he had. Unfortunately, he only had three crops before he tragically died. Secret Oath wins the Kentucky Oaks from his first crop. Arcangelo wins the Travers, champion 3-year-old, and the Belmont from his second crop. And now he's got Seize the Grey from his third crop. So I think we're going to learn as time goes on, and we're already learning, that it was a major, major loss for Arrogate not to be able to produce more horses because he was so brilliant and so fast on the racetrack. He was bred beautifully that it just seemed impossible that he wasn't going to be a successful stallion. And it's tough to not have his horses going forward beyond this crop. Now, he will have a bunch of brood mares who are hopefully producing, stars and stallions in their own right. So there will be some kind of legacy for him. But to me, that was one of the things that, it was a little bittersweet for me. I love Arrogate and I love seeing his horses do well, especially the gray horses that kind of look like him. But John, it's unfortunate. It makes me wish that we had gotten at least a few more years from him because, I think he was on his way to stamping himself as one of the top stallions in the world.
And Joe, here's the interesting thing for me is that we talk about how he had 3 crops. He only had 324 registered foals, which is like 1 year of Golden Pal, basically. I mean, it really, if you think about it, it was more of a standard book than it is like in this quote unquote modern day book where you have 240 mares bred to a popular stallion. So of the 320 or so foals that he had, which I'm considering really two foal crops, basically, he had 6 grade 1 winners.
Wow.
6. Fun to Dream, Secret Oath, and Tell Me No Lies, so we pinhooked. We weren't smart enough to keep her. Arcangelo, Cave Rock, and now Seize the Grey. So he had 6 out of 300, which quick math is roughly 2% of all of his foals that were registered became grade 1 winners. That's 3 times the historic average. 3 times the historic average. The average is like 0.8% of all foals win a grade 1, and he had 3 times that number. So it really is even more extraordinary. You say, well, why weren't more people breeding to Arrogate? Well, because that farm in particular, caps, in essence, has a soft cap on the number of mares that they breed to him. And also, we forget that Sons of Unbridled Song weren't doing well as stallions. I mean, they really weren't for the most part. Unbridled Song had a plethora of great runners, and and a few of them that ended up standing at stud. But he was like a relatively dud compared to what his offspring did on the racetrack. He was a dud as a stallion. So people were cold on Arrogate, just as you said. They weren't selling. They weren't sale ringers. Or sale toppers when they were being offered. And there was even a cold period, if you were. I mean, you only had 3 crops. And there was a cold period where people were like, I'm off him because there's no good Sons of Unbridled Song that are standing, that are doing well. He's just going to be another dud. And there was a myriad of reasons, some true, some, fictitious, as to why he wasn't going to make it as a stallion. But now he's coming back, and I really believe that his daughters especially will be very well sought after, almost like the Secretariat daughters were sought after.
Yeah, absolutely. That's another thing is like Juddmonte had a ton of great fillies that they bred to him. They bought horses just to breed to him. I think of what was it, Take Charge Paula or one
Yeah,
of
it
those
was
horses.
somebody
Like
from the Take Charge Indy family. Yeah,
yeah, so he had like a rock star like caliber entourage of mares
I see what you
that
did there, Joe. I see how you worked that in there.
followed him to the breeding shed. So I think his legacy will live on. It's just unfortunate we only got a couple of crops from him. The other storylines, as you mentioned earlier, 2 weeks, 1, 2, 3 horses that came back in 2 weeks from the Derby ran 1, 2, 3. So it's one of those things where like there's two different schools of thought, and there's the school of thought that, oh, you got to have everything perfect, you got to have the exact right, the horse has to have between 48 and 57 days, and like three and a half breezes and blah blah blah, and like then there's the school of thought like Dwayne Lucas, hey, the horse is doing well, strike while the iron's hot, and let's put him back in a big race and then hopefully win. And it got him a Preakness win at 88 years old. So, and shout out to Kenny McPeak as well. Ran Mystic Dan. Mystic Dan, we haven't even mentioned, ran great. He ran awesome. Like there was no disgrace in losing that race over what I thought was a pretty speed favoring track. I thought he ran his heart out. And Kenny McPeak has now shipped him up to Saratoga.
Yep.
He hasn't made a decision yet, but he is at least under consideration to run in all 3 legs of the Triple Crown. So shout out to the old school guys who don't need everything to be exactly perfect for their horses to go out and perform at a top level on the racetrack. And I do think it's inevitable that we're going to stretch out the spacing of the Triple Crown. I think it's going to happen sooner rather than later. But it was great to have a throwback Preakness where horses that just ran came back and ran again and didn't disintegrate into dust. That was nice to see as well.